Hey, it's episode number 75 on the VBAC Link podcast, and we're so excited for today's episode from a friend of ours named Sarah. She's actually one of our followers that's been kind of with us from the beginning, so it's pretty awesome to have her with us and have her have such a familiarity with our podcast and our blog and everything else that we have to offer. So we are so excited to have her. And of course, we have a review of the week, and Julie is going to tell you all about this review.
I sure am. I'm excited for Sarah. I recognize her Instagram account, and she's been a big part of our community, and she is another one of our VBAC certified doulas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Here we go with that review. This review is from Brittany Henley 9478, and she says, I am pregnant with my second baby and will try for a VBAC in 4 months. Since finding this podcast, I have learned so much and have gained a lot of confidence in my decisions. I am so grateful for the podcast, their IG, their Instagram, and their website. I can't wait to come back and share my successful VBAC story with them later this year. Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love hearing that this is helping everyone as they prepare for their VBAC. And Brittany, I think we've seen you around in our Facebook community, but if you are not there, you should join it. And so should you, Woman of Strength, who is listening right now. Head on over on Facebook if you're not already part of our VBAC Link community. We have a great support group there waiting for you.
You are tuned in to the VBAC Link podcast with Julie Francom and Megan Heaton, VBAC moms, doulas, and educators here to help you get inspired for birth after having a C-section. Together, they have created a robust VBAC preparation course along with this uplifting podcast for women who are preparing for their VBAC. Although these episodes are VBAC specific, they encourage all expectant moms to listen and educate themselves on how to avoid a cesarean from the get-go. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. It is not meant to replace advice from any other qualified medical professional. Here are your hosts, Julie and Megan.
All right, it's Podcast Wednesday, and like we said, we've got a great story from our friend Sarah today. So without further ado, we are going to turn over the time to Sarah, and then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about some steps on how to get your partner on board with VBAC, because I know my husband was a little apprehensive, and I know many other husbands are. So we're going to talk about that, so stick around at the end. Sarah, we're going to turn the time over to you.
Okay. Well, I am so excited to be on the podcast. It's true. I have been following you guys from the beginning, so this is pretty exciting to be on here. Before my birth, I would say, would not consider myself a person that would be really outspoken, obviously, about birth, and I think that my birth kind of changed that for me and really changed the direction of my life, and so I'm super excited to share my story and hopefully inspire some people out there.
I guarantee you will.
Yay. Okay. So I am a mom of 3 kids. So I'm going to be talking about my third birth today, my second VBAC. And just a little brief history on me. I had 3 kids in a little under 4 years. So I had a very steep learning curve with birth and parenting all at the same time. We got pregnant with our first child, and we suffered with infertility for a few years, and so I was hoping the birth would be something that would be very much in my control and go the way that I wanted, because infertility kind of took that away from us, and it didn't end up working out that way. My daughter flipped breech at 37 weeks, and I didn't know. I was a first-time mom, and I was really trusting of my provider, and when we went in and found out that the baby was breech, they mentioned ECV, an external cephalic version. Not sure if I said that right. And she mentioned that, but my daughter was actually footling breech, and that, per my provider, was a harder position to get to turn, and she mentioned an emergency C-section if it didn't go right. And after all the struggle that we had been through, we really did not want an emergency C-section. I had been pregnant, and I had heard those horror stories, you know, about people who weren't awake when their baby was born, and I was really scared for that to happen. And so we just decided to schedule a C-section, and my provider really didn't give me many other options for things I could try on my own to try to get baby to flip. And so we basically got 2 weeks to change plans, and my daughter was a planned C-section, and she came out and was healthy and crying, and we had waited so long to meet her that we were grateful, but she was immediately taken away from me. And I was very, very sick from the anesthesia, and so it was several hours of me being sick before I got to hold her, and everyone was in the waiting room wanting to hold her, and I just remember I said, I don't care how mad they are, I'm going to be the first one that holds her, so everyone else can just deal with it.
Good for you.
And so her experience really, I was happy she was here. It just was very different from what I thought it would be. I was hoping to have a natural childbirth, without drugs, and that was obviously a total 180. And so from her experience, we found ourselves pregnant actually again before her first birthday, which after all our struggles was a very pleasant surprise. But I was still kind of coping with her birth and working through that on my own. So I ended up finding a local ICANN group, the International Cesarean Awareness Network, and I ended up asking for doula recommendations in the group, and I found a doula. And so my doula really talked me through all my options. I knew that I wanted to have a VBAC because I had started to do some research, and I kind of felt that the information I was given the first time didn't really give me all the options, and I didn't really want to feel that way again. So I really leaned on my doula's knowledge, and I was very open with her about everything my provider was saying. And based on things I was told, like trying to schedule a repeat C-section at my 8-week appointment, my doula did not tell me I should switch providers, but she told me to get a second opinion, and so I did. And so I ended up switching providers with my pregnancy, and long story short on that, with my doula's help and my husband's support, we ended up having our first VBAC with our first son, which was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
And that ended up being a different process than I thought it would be too. I had a long labor with him, which foolishly I wasn't expecting. I was like, well, it was pretty rough the first time, maybe I'll get it a little easier this time, and it wasn't. So anyway, when I fell pregnant for the third time, I knew that things would be different for me because I knew it was our last baby. And so I knew it was my last chance to hopefully get the birth experience that I had wanted the first time around. And so I really, really educated myself. I had switched providers before, and so it wasn't something that I was afraid to do. And ICANN does a really good job with training and advocacy and education. And so I knew that if I wasn't feeling comfortable, that I needed to take the advice that I was getting from leadership in my group and from things I would tell members themselves. If you're with a provider and they're telling you things that don't make you feel supported and comfortable, that you should switch. And so it was hard for me to make that switch. I always kind of brushed that off a little bit, like, well, it's not as hard as you think it would. But I was in a practice that was really very small. I had seen the same person for my entire pregnancy. The caveat for them was that since I'm in Nebraska, midwives here don't get to practice full scope of care. And so the midwives were supervised by an OB that had to back them up. And their backup arrangement entailed him being there when you were actually pushing at the hospital. And so they required that you have a consult with the OB if you wanted to VBAC, which I was okay with having the consult. From doing ICANN, realized that midwifery care here is not the same as it is other places, and so midwives here are treated as a less than provider, even though they are fully qualified to deal with all sorts of issues. So I met with him, and he was an MFM, like a maternal fetal medicine doctor, and so going in, I knew he dealt with high-risk pregnancies primarily, and so being a VBAC to him was considered high risk, I'm sure. And I met with him, and I just didn't really like his demeanor. and he used a VBAC calculator with me. And
We don't like
I
these
was
things
like,
very much.
I was meeting with him, and I actually had to go to that appointment by myself. My husband was sick, and so he wasn't able to go with me. So I was by myself, and I just remember him talking, and I just remember like seeing spots, like because I was so mad about what he was saying, and I just knew that he couldn't be in my birth space. He couldn't be there. I wouldn't birth the way that I wanted. I wouldn't be comfortable doing it. And so I was probably around my 20-week appointment when I had to meet with him, and then I ended up switching. I thought about it a lot. I ended up switching around 28 weeks to a different group in town. It's a group that has the best VBAC statistics where we live, but it was a group practice, so I knew that I wouldn't necessarily be choosing the provider that I would have delivering. And so since I switched late, there was a possibility that I would be not meeting all of the providers before I delivered with them.
Yeah.
So my husband was a real sport because from doing ICANN, he knows not to tell me no about birth, really. For the most
Good
part.
man.
For the most part, because he knew that I knew a lot more about it, and he really wanted me to have the experience that we had been lacking. And honestly, like, he knew it was his last experience too, and so he was hoping that he could have a little bit different experience too. So, as I mentioned, midwives can't practice full scope of practice here, and that's in a hospital setting. But also having a home birth here is very difficult as well. It's made national news recently. Our issues here with home birth midwifery, and that was originally what I wanted for the third birth. Well, that was like the one thing he told me no on was a home birth. And so I kept giving him a hard time because we lived fairly close to a hospital, and I was like, we're really close. If something happens, like, we're super close, it would be okay. And I just kept trying to push him, and he said no. And so I finally resigned myself towards the end of my pregnancy that this was going to be where I was going to have to deliver at a hospital again. And so I kind of knew that there was going to have to be a compromise there, but that I was going to try to labor as much as possible the way that I could. So I decided, and I told him, I said, okay, you don't want a home birth. Well, I don't agree with that. I understand it's he had a big fear of uterine rupture. And I said, okay, I understand that fear, and I understand that for you, the best way to make that lessened is to give birth at the hospital. I said, but I am going to labor at home as long as possible. And he's like, what do you mean, like a car baby? And I was like, not a car baby.
Like a car.
Not a car baby.
My dream birth right there.
Yeah. Well, maybe the roads are maintained out better in Salt Lake. I believe they are, but that's a pretty risky proposition here. And so, yeah, we got kind of towards the end of my pregnancy, and I was working full time. And I would say I had prodromal labor fairly strong for at least a week, where I would I worked a desk job, and I would get up to go to the copier, and I'd be standing at the copier, and oh, there's one. And if I stood there long enough, I would have a few contractions if I was making a bunch of copies. And I remember that people at my work were actually starting to joke that I was going to have the baby at work, because I would get up and have another contraction, and so I had told my husband that it was like a Monday, and I had told him that I kind of had contractions all day, and he was like, okay, well, you can't drive yourself to the hospital. Like, he's like, I'm going to tell you no on that too. Like, you're not driving yourself to the hospital. And I was like, well, and he's like, no, you're not. And so I had prodromal labor, pretty frequent contractions, I would say. Like, during the day, I probably had like 3 to 4 an hour. So, I mean, they were noticeable. I was sleeping through them at night for the most part, but I definitely, from laboring before, could tell that my body was gearing up. And with my first VBAC, I went overdue. And so, of course, I went overdue again. So to the shock and horror of my coworkers, I showed up again and again and again.
Oh,
I actually ended up going quite a few days over because I actually hadn't really told anyone but my boss my due date, but I had said my due date was like late May to early June. So when I kept showing up and it was approaching, more mid-June, they were like, okay, at some point you're going to have the baby, right? And so I remember it was a Friday, and I went to work that day, and I was drinking a lot of water because I was having more contractions. And I would say I was floating on what some people would call the denial river. So I just was like, well, it's a Friday. I'm just going to work through this. Like, do life as long as you can is what my doula had told me. We did hire a doula again, and she had just really emphasized that. Do life as long as you can, and then when you can't anymore, then it's going to be time to have a baby. And so I did that, and I remember I got home that night, and I could kind of tell that things were starting to probably be the real deal at that point. And I helped my husband make dinner, and as we were making dinner, I would have contractions, and I would say they were contractions I couldn't ignore because he would be in the middle of talking to me, and I'd just, hold up my finger and be like, you're cute, but
Don't
hold
talk
that
to
thought.
me.
And so he was like, he had read through the doula handbook that she had given us, and I could tell he was starting to, time the contractions, something I specifically did not want to do for myself because it didn't matter to me. I wanted to just really listen to my body and not be focused on the time. And so we made dinner, ate dinner as a family with our 2 kids. And then I just asked my husband, I said, do you think you can put the kids to bed? I'm still having contractions and they're kind of picking up. I don't want to worry the kids because our daughter was almost 4 and our son was 2.5. So I just was like, I don't really want to worry them. They already know that we're going to have a baby, and there's been a million questions from my daughter, and I just didn't want her worried that mommy was in pain and stuff like that was really worrying for her. She knew we were going to have a baby and go to the hospital, but she was concerned about the pain part of it for me. And so I just went to our room, and the lights were off, and we had one of our dogs came with me, and I just really focused on laboring by myself in the dark where I was comfortable. And my husband got the kids to bed by some miracle all by himself without any fits. And so he'd come in and check on me, and I'd be like, yeah, I'm still having them. And he'd be like, how often? And I'd be like, I don't know. And he'd be like, okay, that's not helpful information. We kind of need to start timing these. And I was like, no, we don't. And so he left for a while, and he's like, you just kind of keep me posted, because he was kind of clean. He went to clean up dinner and, make sure we had the hospital bag and everything ready. And so he kept checking in with me. And I just remember just, focusing inward when I had a contraction and just being really in tune with my body and realizing that they were getting closer, longer, stronger, and closer together. I'm a doula, so longer, stronger, closer together. This is labor. I get that. And so I was like, well, I'm at home. I should get in the shower because I won't be able to do that at the hospital as a VBAC, because you get a HEP block and you get that lovely continuous fetal monitoring. So I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do much of what I wanted once I got to the hospital. So I got in the shower, and I remember my husband opened the door and he's like, hey, how's the shower? And I was having a contraction, and I couldn't talk to him. And he was like, okay. And he just stood there and he waited till it was over. And he's like, so, how many of those have you had while you've been in here? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. And he was in there not more probably than 2 or 3 minutes, and I had another one. And he was like, okay, so I think you should get out of the shower now. And I was like, no, I'm good. And he's like, no, we're going to get out of the shower. Because he was getting a little suspicious, I think, that I was like, maybe I can pull off this home birth. And so I just remember the shower felt great, but it was making my contractions really intense. And so I got out of the shower, and so we probably ate dinner-ish between 6 and 6:30, finished around 7. He got the kids down around 8. So I'm trying to give a timeline, but I wasn't timing contractions or looking at the clock. And so about 10:30, 10:45-ish, I had gotten out of the shower, dried off, got some clothes on, and the contractions were starting to become pretty intense, and I couldn't ignore them, and I couldn't talk through them. And I just remember I was starting to make noise, and I was really starting to move with them. And I didn't want to go out where there was lights. I just wanted to stay in our room where it was quiet and dark. And so my husband was like, yeah, so I'm going to call my mom now because someone needs to watch the kids. And so he called his mom about 10:45. And she lives about 20 minutes away, but since it was late, she didn't get there till about 11:15. And I remember she got there, and we sat in the living room, and I just sat down to, like, chit-chat with her as my husband looked at me as if I was nuts. He was like, what are you doing? I was like, what? Your mom's here. I'm going to talk to her for a minute. And he's like, he's just looking at me, and you know that look your husband gives you when he's been waiting for a while. And so I sat and I talked with her probably like 10 or 15 minutes, and I had a few contractions during that. And he was like, yeah, so we're going to go now. We're kind of done entertaining. Like, she's got it. We're good. And his mom was like, okay, just let me know when the baby comes. And they had helped with our second labor. So she was like, well, maybe this will be a while, you know. So we got in the car, and it's about a 20 to 30-minute drive, and my husband hopped on, and he drove down the street, then we hopped on the interstate, and I remember he actually, like, took a road that was really, really bumpy on the way. He, like, kind of took a shortcut, and I remember glaring at him in the dark, and I was like, you know I'm in labor, right? You seriously know I'm in labor? And he's like, yeah, I'm taking this shortcut, and I was like, could you hit more potholes? You know how you kind of get a little testy in labor. Like, could you hit more potholes? Could you hit more red lights? You know. And so when we got to the hospital, there's like a circle drive you can pull up in, or there's like a parking garage. And the parking garage is quite a bit further away. And he was like, well, do you want me to do the circle drive or the parking garage? And I was like, oh, yeah, I'd definitely like to walk some more. So, yeah, let's park in the parking garage. And we had called our doula on the way to the hospital and told her that change of plans, don't come to our house, come to the hospital. And it was going to be interstate basically for her either way. So she's like, okay, great, I'll meet you at the hospital. So we pull in the garage, and she pulls in right next to us. And it was total luck that she pulled in next to us, because I get out and I immediately have a contraction, because they kind of slowed a bit in the car, and I got out and like I immediately had a super strong contraction. And so she gets out of her car and she's like, hey there, how you doing? And my husband's like, she needs to get inside. I was like, okay. And so it's a walk. It's quite a walk. It's not, I don't know if it's like it's not a quarter mile, but when you're in labor, it might as well be. And so I remember that we had to walk to the security desk, because this was the middle of the night. So the hospital that we were going to gets triage for like gunshots and stuff. So they have it pretty locked down at night. And so we had to walk to the security desk. And I remember I was having contractions, and I was actually going through transition as we were walking
joy.
in the hospital, like, to get to the security desk. And so we get there, and it was like a scene out of a movie. There was a guy in front of us who didn't speak English very well, and the security guard was trying to help him. And our doula, I was just like ready to just push both of them out of the way so that we could get where we needed to go. And so he finally got checked in. It was probably a couple minutes, but I had like almost 2 contractions in that time. So I was like, we should. And so I'm standing there, they're trying to check us in, and I like grabbed the podium and just like let out this huge roar. And the doula's like, so we're going to have the baby here if you don't let us go upstairs. And he just was like, go, just go.
Did they think you were lying?
I know.
I don't know. Does he see a lot of people trying to swipe, like get things in a pregnant belly? I don't know.
You never know, I guess, these days.
So, yeah. So we got up there, and while we were like riding the elevator up, it had been funny. My last appointment, it was a midwife group I was with. She had told me several stories about people like having an elevator baby or a lobby baby or whatever. And I was like, yeah, I think she jinxed me. Like, I'm feeling pretty close to that right now. And so we walked in to the check-in waiting area for labor and delivery. And I don't know, there again, because it was the middle of the night, there just didn't seem to be a sense of urgency about getting us checked in. So, I made some more noise, and
Good for you.
I remember the desk lady was like, so let me just call someone for you real quick. And so the doors open, and out comes this nurse, and she's in full surgical garb. Like, she literally even has, like, the plastic mask over her face, and she introduces herself, and I don't remember her name. You never remember their name, do you? And so she's like, hi, introduces herself. I'm trying to introduce everybody, and she's like, okay, yep, that's great. And I said, I think I need to go to the bathroom. And she's like, do you now? She's like, let's go together.
Now.
Let's go together. And I said, and she's like, yeah, you're not going to go to the bathroom by yourself. Because I was like, I feel like I need to poop. And she's like, do you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I get in the bathroom, and I get in the bathroom, and I'm sitting there, and I think I was just intending to have a toilet baby at that point. And she was like, so yeah, these toilets are really shallow. They're not actually a great place to have a baby. She's like, if you feel like it'd probably be better to move
baby in the toilet.
Yeah. And they were really shallow. It wasn't. Yeah. And she's like, why don't we, maybe think about moving towards the bed? And I was just like a hot mess at that point. Like, everything was kind of a blur, but I remember getting on the bed, and I remember that I was a VBAC. So I remember I got on the bed on hands and knees, and I remember they were like, have you thought about what position you want to push in? And I said, well, this one, because I wasn't moving. I was just done. I was like, I have walked a marathon to get up here. Security almost caught my baby. Like, no, I'm good. And I remember, like, I had my hands over the back of the bed, and they were like, okay, well, we need to do your hep lock. And I was like, okay, if you can wait between contractions or whatever. And they were just coming, like, on top of each other, and I just felt like I needed to push. And so they did get it in, and luckily they, like, got it in and were done. But this poor nurse, not even a poor nurse, but she had to, like, hold the monitor, like, at the very bottom of my belly, because my son was so far down already, because I was about to push him out, that, like, she was basically, like, monitoring my vagina almost at that point.
Gosh.
Like, she's like, well, we have to have a heart rate.
If the head is out, the heart rate is not going to be found very easily.
Yeah, so the head wasn't quite out, but I mean, she was
silly.
We got to know each other well at that point. And so I remember thinking, as I was about to push, there was a very sudden realization that there was no drugs at that point. It was too late. And I knew that that's what I wanted, but that was like the first moment that I actually put the pieces together, that there would be nothing, that this was it. This is how it was going to be. And my husband was like, you can do this. And I remember saying, this effing hurts. Mm-hmm. And he was like, you're doing great. And my doula was like, you're doing great. You're beautiful. And I was like, there's no way any of that was true, because I was sweating to death. And I gave one push, and I remember his head came out. Yeah. But because I was on hands and knees, I couldn't see. I couldn't see anything, what was going on. Like, they're like, that's the head. And I remember that I pushed again, and nothing changed. His head stayed out, but his shoulders did not come out at all. And I remember them saying, like, okay, we need to try to turn him, because he's not coming out. So they just did, like, probably a quarter turn. I couldn't see, so I don't know exactly what they did, but like a quarter turn. And then I gave one more push, and he was out. So I didn't push for very long, but I remember people saying things like, well, try to breathe him out. There was no breathing him out. I had the fetal ejection reflex, like, get the baby out. Like, just get him out. And when you're on hands and knees, it's so weird, because then, like, he's, like, between my legs, but not, like, in a way that it's easy to, like, reach for him. So I remember trying to reach down and like pull him to my chest, but he didn't have a long enough cord, so he only got to like my stomach. He just didn't have a very long cord. And so they like at least got me over back on my back because I couldn't do very much with him on my stomach holding him the way that I was. So that's why some of the pictures are really awkward that I had sent in, but he was, you know, absolutely perfect, great APGARs and everything. And I remember my husband was like, he doesn't cry much, but I know he shed a couple of tears, and he was like, you are so strong, you can absolutely do anything. My doula was the one that took the pictures, and she was like, well, you're my fastest labor support I've ever done, because from the time we checked in till the time he was born from the time we got to the room till the time he was born was like 15 or 20 minutes. Wow. So it was very fast once we got like to the hospital room. And who knows how fast I would have had him if I didn't have the whole security debacle and all of that. I think I was probably like, I don't want to have the baby at security right now. And so things that were interesting to me, I guess, about him in particular was my last appointment, I was over 40 weeks, and they wanted to do a growth scan because my fundal measurement was reading really small, probably 3 to 4 weeks smaller than what it should have been. So they told me that he was going to be a bigger baby than my second one. And I kind of shrugged it off, and I didn't believe them at all about that. And so he was 19 and a half inches long, which was about the same as my other two, and he was 7 pounds 3 ounces, which is about what I thought he would be, but the ultrasound had said that they thought he was going to be like 8 to 8.5 pounds.
Why do the ultrasounds always measure bigger? I've never heard of an ultrasound say, oh, well, your baby's going to be 8 pounds, and then the baby comes out to be 10 pounds. It's always bigger.
And with VBACs, it seems like it was too. And what was really funny and what I think happened was that I think he was so far engaged already in my pelvis that's why I read small.
That's what my little boy did. He read small like that, but he wasn't small. Yeah.
He wasn't small, and I hadn't been reading small like the whole time. It was just at the end, and like I don't think it was per se that he dropped. He just was really well engaged, and so I had done some spinning baby stuff, and I had done chiropractic with this pregnancy, and I had been a lot more active. So a lot of people had said, oh, well, maybe I'll have a faster labor. Well, I did. I had a lot faster labor, and so I just remember being shocked that, one, I was able to do it without any drugs because I don't consider myself a person with a high pain tolerance, and two, just how fast the process was and how it was trying to connect what had just happened in such a short amount of time was really overwhelming, like in a good way overwhelming, but it was a very intense labor for me, and it was very intense at the end, and there was definitely concern on my husband's part probably that we were going to have a baby in the hallway, I think, and he was such a good sport about the whole thing. And like before we even had him, we knew we were done having kids, but I think this labor would have absolutely sealed the deal because we would have had to have had a home birth with more kids, because if I would have labored less time than that, we never would have left.
Yeah.
So,
oh yeah.
So it was a wonderful experience, and I guess the big takeaways that I got from it was like really trusting my intuition as far as my provider and not worrying about what other people thought, because I was pretty vocal about having a VBAC, and as you know, it's really important to surround yourself with people that will support that. You know, it wasn't like I was leaving a provider that I would consider unsupportive to go to a provider that was supportive. I was just leaving a provider that really I didn't like the backup doctor. Like the care that I had received was fine, but just knowing that person was going to be there wasn't the right decision for me. And so the really funny thing about all of it was that, so I switched to this midwife group with the great VBAC statistics. Well, I delivered with the hospitalist, so the doctor that was on call, and a resident. And the funniest part of the labor, not for me personally because it wasn't my fault, but they were like, when I got on hands and knees, they're like, okay, we just want to do a quick check to make sure it's okay for you to push. And I swear that the doctor must have laughed as she let the resident check me, because apparently it was like a Shamu water show, and like my water broke all over the resident, like down to their shoes. Like, I guess they had to go change afterwards. And so I asked my husband, I was like, was the doctor like laughing at the resident? Like, yeah, you go ahead and check, because my water bag just had to be bulging. Like, there was no reason that they probably needed to check me. But at that point I didn't care. But yeah, it was pretty funny to apparently I shamued somebody.
That's hilarious.
I love it. That's awesome. It's a birth they'll never forget.
It's a birth. Well, and my midwife came and saw me the next day, and she was like, so you're pretty famous here on the floor. Dr. Resident, I hear. And she was like, she's super sweet, and she was an older lady, and she's like, I'm sorry that I missed that. And I said, it's okay. Yeah. I said, I knew a lot, and I knew that this whole facility was supportive, so I guess I wasn't worried about who was catching my baby at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. You felt confident that no matter who it was, they were going to be great. I love it.
They were.
I love it. Yeah. So, earlier in this episode, we kind of talked about partners, and sometimes partners not really being on board with the whole VBAC idea. And definitely, I don't know many that are like rooting for car births necessarily, husband-wise. But we have a blog that we wrote. Actually, Julie wrote it. And it's all about how to try to get your partner on board with VBAC. And she lists some awesome things. So check out our blog. And also in that blog, we have a special episode by one of our mentors. Her name is Lynn Christian. And so check that out too. It's special episode number 9. I think that it's an awesome episode for anyone to listen to, whether or not even hiring a doula or VBAC, or just really understanding the personality and how the brain, heart, and gut really work. So check those out. It's on thevbaclink.com/blog, or if you didn't know this already, you can actually listen to our podcast straight from our website, and that is found at thevbaclink.com/podcast. So if you don't have Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Play, or what is it called? Google
Podcasts.
Google
Podcasts?
Play
Podcasts.
Yeah, something like that.
We're there too.
Yeah, you can head over to our website.
Yeah.
So check it out. And seriously, thank you so much for sharing your story. I love it. It's awesome. I kind of envy you in a little bit of a way because my VBAC was so dang long. And I'm like, I want that. I want to be able to go fast like that and have a hospitalist deliver my baby. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing and for being such a dedicated follower to us.
Yes, thank you. If you want to find out more about Sarah and how she can support you in your own VBAC as one of our VBAC trained doulas, you can go to our website, thevbaclink.com/findadoula, and click on her state, which is Nebraska. And you can, right from there, email her or go right to her website. Give her a follow on Instagram. Her Instagram is BB, like boy, so the letter B 2 times, BB Eyes Birth. And she's right on Instagram. We're going to tag her in our posts on Instagram. So if you just want to find the VBAC link, go over there and find her post and click on her link. Her website, or her birth company is called Baby Blue Eyes Birth Services. She teaches local VBAC courses there. She has great doula services, and she is a wonderful, trained and educated VBAC doula. And we just love her so much. I wanted to say one more thing about that blog. We actually also have a worksheet in that blog, linked in that blog, that you can download about how to talk to your partner about VBAC. And it's like an actual step-by-step worksheet that you guys like write down and fill out so you can actually have a good conversation and get to the root of where the issues are. And that's also linked right in the blog. So we have 3 things for you: a blog, a podcast, and a worksheet. That's how important it is to us that you guys are able to talk to the people that that you love the most and that love you the most about the things that are most important to you about your birth.
Would you like to be a guest on the podcast? Head over to thevbaclink.com/share and submit your story. For more information on all things VBAC, including online and in-person VBAC classes, the VBAC blog, and Julie and Megan's bios, head over to thevbaclink.com. Congratulations on starting your journey of learning and discovery with the VBAC Link.